Varith Station floated between three star systems like a patient spider at the center of an enormous diplomatic web. The structure itself was older than several small civilizations and about as temperamental as most of them. Rings of transparent alloy stretched around its core, revealing slow rivers of starlight drifting through the black void beyond. Cargo shuttles glided silently along magnetic lanes, while maintenance drones zipped past like metal insects that had consumed far too much caffeine. Inside the Grand Convergence Hall, however, elegance had been weaponized. Hundreds of delegates from dozens of species filled the enormous chamber, their robes, armor, ceremonial feathers, and occasionally bioluminescent tentacles reflecting the gentle glow of floating chandeliers. The chandeliers themselves were small anti-gravity sculptures containing miniature artificial nebulae that slowly swirled in delicate colors. Someone once calculated that the electricity required to power them could have fed an entire moon colony. But diplomacy demanded good lighting. A long central table curved through the hall like a silver river, each section marked by the insignia of a different civilization. Translators hummed quietly in the air, converting hundreds of languages into neat whispers inside everyone's ears. At the far end of the hall stood Queen Savar of the Aeleri. The Aeleri were one of those species that looked almost human until you looked twice. Their skin held a faint luminescent sheen, their movements were too graceful to be entirely biological, and their ears were long, elegant arcs that curved behind their heads like sculpted blades of ivory. Queen Savar's ears were particularly impressive. Some ambassadors claimed they moved slightly whenever she was irritated, which meant they had been in near constant motion for the past hour. The summit had not been going well. A trade minister from the Karth Dominion had just delivered a speech so long that 3 translators briefly went into standby mode out of sheer exhaustion. Across the table, several ambassadors had begun staring into the distance with the hollow expressions of beings contemplating their life choices. Near the back wall of the chamber stood Tomas Vey. Officially, Tomas was part of the station's Joint Security Detachment. Unofficially, he was here to make sure nobody started a war before dessert. Human soldiers had developed a reputation in interstellar diplomacy as useful background objects. They stood still, looked professional, and occasionally moved furniture. Tomas was doing all 3. He leaned against a column and watched the room with the casual boredom of someone who had attended far too many official meetings, involving people who believed their own speeches were interesting. To his left, a small hovering service drone drifted by carrying a tray of drinks. The drone paused midair. "Human security unit," it chirped politely. "You appear mentally absent." "I'm meditating," Tomas muttered. "You are staring at a chandelier. Deep meditation." The drone considered this for a moment before deciding that humans were beyond its programming capabilities and floated away. At the center of the chamber, Queen Savar finally raised one elegant hand. The hall fell silent almost instantly. When the queen spoke, her voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to ruling star systems and occasionally disciplining stubborn admirals. "Esteemed delegates," she said, "this summit was meant to celebrate unity between worlds." Her long ears tilted slightly backward. "Instead, we have spent 2 hours listening to speeches that could tranquilize a charging battle cruiser." A few diplomats coughed nervously. The queen stood slowly, her cloak shifting like liquid silver. "There is, however, another matter that requires attention." That sentence alone caused half the room to become deeply interested in their water glasses. Everyone knew what was coming. Behind the queen stood Princess Nyril. Tomas noticed her immediately. She looked young by Aeleri standards, though young for their species could still mean a century or 2. Her dark hair flowed down her shoulders, and her long ears curved elegantly behind her head, catching the soft light of the chamber. Her expression was calm, observant, dangerously observant. Tomas had heard the stories during security briefings. Princess Nyril possessed a rare neurological trait among the Aeleri. She lacked the instinctive social filters most intelligent species developed over millions of years. In simpler terms, she said exactly what she thought. Always. Ambassador Krell from the Talver Union had once asked her if she enjoyed his poetry. Nyril had reportedly replied, "It reads like a refrigerator manual attempting to experience sadness." The Talver Union had not spoken to the Aeleri for 6 months. Now Queen Savar stepped forward and looked across the entire chamber. "My daughter," the Queen announced, "has reached the age where tradition expects her to choose a consort." A few nobles shifted uncomfortably. "Over the past 7 years," the Queen continued, "representatives from 5 worlds have visited our court." Her ears twitched. None of them stayed longer than 2 days. Tomas heard someone whisper, "2 days is actually impressive." The Queen's voice grew sharper. "I have listened to excuses. I have endured polite refusals. I have even read one letter claiming sudden spiritual enlightenment as a reason to decline further meetings." A pause. Then Queen Savar raised her voice so it echoed through the enormous chamber. "Is there truly no one brave enough to marry my daughter?" The words rolled across the hall like distant thunder. Silence followed. A very long silence. One diplomat slowly pretended to examine the ceiling. Another ambassador coughed and leaned behind a decorative sculpture as if hiding might help. Princess Nyril watched them all with quiet curiosity. Her long ears tilted slightly forward. From the back wall, Tomas Vey looked around the room. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence stretched longer, and for reasons Tomas could not yet explain, something about that silence began to irritate him. The silence in the grand convergence hall became so thick that even the translation drones seemed nervous about interrupting it. One of them drifted halfway across the room, reconsidered its life choices, and quietly returned to its charging port. Queen Savar stood motionless at the center of the chamber, her long Aeleri ears angled slightly backward like elegant blades waiting for movement. None came. Across the curved diplomatic tables, representatives of powerful civilizations suddenly discovered urgent interest in extremely unimportant objects. A Karth warlord began polishing a gauntlet that was already reflective enough to signal satellites. 2 Talver nobles leaned together and started whispering, with the intensity of people pretending their conversation had begun hours ago. An ambassador from the Thalen Cooperative pulled out a datapad and began typing random symbols as if drafting legislation about something. Possibly agriculture, possibly sandwiches. Princess Nyril watched all of them. Her long ears tilted forward slightly, catching every whispered excuse, every uncomfortable breath. "Remarkable," she said softly to her mother. Queen Savar did not turn her head. "What is remarkable?" "The speed with which courage evaporates when introduced to honesty." Several nearby delegates coughed. One chair scraped loudly as someone tried to leave the hall without technically standing up. Near the back wall, Tomas Vey rubbed his forehead. He had seen awkward situations before. Military briefings where commanders realized their strategy made no sense. Diplomatic dinners where someone accidentally insulted an alien religious object that turned out to be the centerpiece. But this was different. This was a room full of powerful beings collectively pretending they did not exist. Tomas leaned slightly toward the security officer standing beside him, a broad-shouldered woman from Mars named Hale. "Is it just me?" Tomas murmured. "Or are we watching an entire galaxy hide behind furniture?" Hale didn't look away from the chamber floor. "Do not get involved." "I'm not involved. You are thinking about getting involved. That's just speculation. You have that look." Tomas sighed. "What look?" "The look humans get right before they volunteer for something extremely stupid. That is an unfair stereotype. You joined orbital infantry because you were bored. That was a tactical career decision." Hale finally glanced at him. "You fell out of the sky wearing a jetpack. Technically, I fell with style." Across the chamber, Queen Savar slowly turned her gaze from one delegation to another. "Surely," she said, Among the leaders of 5-star systems, there must be someone willing to demonstrate basic bravery. Her voice remained calm, which somehow made the silence worse. Princess Nyril stepped slightly forward beside her mother. Her gaze moved across the crowd with quiet curiosity, as if observing a fascinating species of cowardly wildlife. "I believe," she said thoughtfully, "many of them are calculating the emotional damage involved." A noble at the nearest table nearly choked on his drink. Nyril continued calmly. "One of them just thought the phrase psychological excavation. I assume he means me." Queen Savar closed her eyes briefly. "My daughter," she said carefully, "perhaps this is not the moment to narrate their thoughts." Nyril tilted her head, "But they are thinking them very loudly." Across the chamber, Tomas exhaled slowly. He had spent most of his adult life surrounded by people who carefully measured every word they spoke. Commanders who said strategic repositioning instead of retreat. Politicians who said resource redistribution instead of taxes. Diplomats who said constructive disagreement instead of we hate each other. The entire galaxy ran on polite lies, and standing in the center of this ridiculous room was someone who simply refused to participate. He glanced again at the silent delegates. No one moved. No one spoke. The Queen's challenge still hung in the air like an unanswered alarm. Tomas felt the irritation growing again. Not anger, just exhaustion. "Don't," Hale muttered beside him. "I didn't say anything. You inhaled. That's suspicious now." That was a decision in Hale. Tomas scratched the back of his neck. Across the hall, Princess Nyril's gaze drifted toward the security wall. Her eyes stopped on him, just for a moment. Her long ears tilted slightly. Tomas froze. "That's not good," he whispered. Hale glanced between them. "She sees you. I'm standing still. She's analyzing you. How can you tell?" She stopped watching the ambassadors. Tomas slowly exhaled. In the center of the hall, Queen Savar lifted her chin. "Very well," she said coolly. "If none of you possess the courage," a chair moved. Boots stepped across the polished floor. The sound echoed clearly through the silent chamber. Every head turned. Hale closed her eyes. "Oh no," she whispered. Tomas Vey walked forward from the back of the hall. Halfway across the chamber, he realized two things at the same time. First, every diplomat in the galaxy was now staring at him. Second, he had absolutely no plan. He stopped several meters from the Queen's platform and rubbed the back of his neck again. "Well," he said carefully. Queen Savar studied him. "You are human," she observed. "Yes, Your Majesty. You are also security personnel. That's correct. And yet you are walking toward a royal marriage challenge." Tomas nodded slowly. "That does seem to be what's happening." A ripple of stunned whispers moved through the chamber. Princess Nyril stepped forward slightly, studying him with open curiosity. "You are afraid," she said. Tomas blinked. "Extremely." A few ambassadors looked confused. Nyril tilted her head. "Then why did you move?" Tomas shrugged. "Honestly," he glanced around the silent hall. "I got tired of watching everyone pretend they couldn't hear the question." Tomas Vey stood before Queen Savar and her daughter, realizing that nothing in his entire military career had prepared him for this. Not the asteroid drills, not zero-gravity combat, not the time he accidentally launched a cargo shuttle into an orbital banquet. Nothing. And yet here he was, sweating slightly inside the unbreathable politeness of an interspecies summit, about to volunteer for something far more dangerous. Voluntarily marrying someone whose honesty could cut sharper than a plasma blade. Nyril's eyes were fixed on him, those dark, luminous eyes that seemed to read not just his face, but the restless calculations behind every nerve in his body. Her long ears twitched slightly as if marking his emotional rhythm. "You are aware," she said, "that most beings who step forward for this challenge faint, beg, or run screaming within minutes." Yes," Tomas said, trying to sound confident. "I'm aware." He realized too late that aware sounded suspiciously like reckless. Nyril's lips curved faintly. "Good. Awareness is useful, though not always sufficient." Queen Savar raised an eyebrow, and the entire hall seemed to hold its collective breath. Tomas imagined that someone in the back was probably calculating the odds of his survival in real time, and another was already betting on it. "You are human," the Queen said, her voice perfectly even, "and you understand the consequences of volunteering." "I do," Tomas said, trying to keep his hands from shaking. "Mostly, I think." "You think?" Nyril leaned forward slightly. "Confidence is rarely the same as competence. Please clarify." "I'm competent enough," Tomas said, "and completely aware of the danger of being absolutely honest with you. Which, if I understand correctly, is the point." Nyril's long ears twitched again. "Correct. Honesty is essential. I say what I see, without filters, and expect the same in return. Are you certain this is your choice?" Tomas glanced at the ambassadors. Some were pale, some were silently cursing, and one particularly haughty alien had already begun filing a formal complaint about his own witnessing of this absurdity. Tomas realized he might have just broken centuries of diplomatic decorum. "Yes," he said finally, "I am certain." A faint ripple of surprise passed through the room. Security drones hovered slightly closer, probably unsure if they should intervene or document this for intergalactic archives. Nyril tilted her head. "Interesting. Humans usually claim courage they do not possess, or they run simulations in their minds 100 times before moving." "I ran simulations," Tomas said quickly. "Mostly mental ones involving crashing spacecraft, failing inspections, and accidentally insulting alien royalty. This seemed easier." Nyril's lips twitched again, almost a smile. "Your optimism is curious. Do you always gamble with life and sanity like this?" "I prefer controlled chaos," Tomas said. "It's part of the job description." The Queen studied him, her long ears twitching in a pattern that Tomas guessed was either curiosity or mild disapproval. "If you truly step forward, you must understand the social ramifications. Your world will gossip, your superiors will question your judgment, and most importantly, you will endure my daughter's relentless scrutiny." "I understand," Tomas said, "and I will endure, I think." Nyril's eyes sparkled. "Very well. You may proceed. But know this, honesty will not always be comfortable. Sometimes it will sting. Often it will embarrass you, and occasionally it may be amusing in ways you cannot anticipate." "Amusing is fine," Tomas said, trying to sound casual. "I'm pretty good with humor, and embarrassment I handle it professionally, sort of." Nyril's ears twitched forward again. "We shall see. You are peculiar. But at least you are not immediately repulsive. That is a step forward." Tomas swallowed. Peculiar seemed promising. He took a careful step closer, and suddenly the hall seemed far too quiet. Delegates whispered to themselves, translators stuttered, and one Talver noble had apparently fainted into a decorative fountain. "You must meet protocol," Queen Savar said. "You will spend the next several days in the palace, subject to observation, interviews, and ceremonial trials. You will dine with Nyril, train with her in both physical and mental exercises, and endure assessments by our neural resonance devices." "I'm fine with devices," Tomas said quickly. "I've handled neural scanners before, mostly. Once." Nyril's dark eyes flicked toward him, and her ears swiveled slightly as if amused by his awkward bravery. "Do not underestimate our technology. It can detect deception, hesitation, and petty internal sarcasm. All will be noted." Tomas swallowed again. "Noted. I will try to be honest." "Good," Nyril said simply. "Try. You may start by telling me why you volunteered. Truth only. No excuses." Tomas glanced around the room. Every delegate was watching. Every drone hovering nearby seemed to pulse slightly, probably recording his response. He looked at Nyril, her expression perfectly calm, and then he shrugged. "I volunteered," he said finally, "because I am tired of people pretending. People lie to survive, to impress, to manipulate. I'm just tired of it. And I figured someone should hear the truth, even if it's terrifying." Nyril's lips curved slightly. "A human willing to hear the truth. Intriguing." "Or insane," Tomas added, because it seemed the safest clarification. Niral's ears twitched in what Tomas assumed was a laugh. Perhaps both. Time will tell. Queen Savar exhaled softly. Then it is decided. You will begin your engagement trials immediately. Let the observation begin. Tomas took another step forward, glanced at the security drone hovering nearby, and muttered, I should have packed more snacks. Niral tilted her head, her ears flicking slightly. You are going to find the palace educational. Tomas nodded, aware that this might be the understatement of the millennium. And as he followed her toward the palace elevators, he realized that the galaxy had just put him in a position from which there was no polite retreat. He had volunteered to marry the alien princess, and for the first time in his life, honesty was his only weapon. The palace elevators hummed softly as Tomas Vey followed Princess Niral through corridors that shifted their dimensions subtly depending on who walked through them. He tripped once over a floor panel that suddenly elongated like a stretching bridge, muttered a few colorful human words under his breath, and Niral's long ears twitched in amused disapproval. Careful, she said. The palace does not appreciate clumsiness. I'll try, Tomas said, though apparently gravity is negotiable in certain sections. Niral's lips curved faintly. It is, and occasionally playful. They arrived at a vast hall filled with floating orbs, each projecting holographic simulations of potential engagement trials. Tomas blinked at the displays, abstract puzzles, virtual combat sequences, social maneuvering simulations, and one that looked suspiciously like a recreation of the summit hall where he had volunteered. A voiceover intoned, Welcome, human candidate. Let the evaluation of compatibility commence. Tomas jumped back, nearly colliding with a hovering tea service robot that squeaked indignantly. Relax, Niral said. It's all routine, mostly. The palace staff enjoys theatrics. Tomas rubbed his neck. Routine is relative, apparently. The first trial involved a neural resonance scanner. A delicate halo of light hovered around his head while sensors read microexpressions, heart rate, and subtle brainwave shifts. Tomas had been through stress tests before, but nothing quite like this. He suspected the machine could tell if he was regretting every life choice that led him here. Be honest, Niral instructed. Every thought counts. Tomas exhaled. All right, I am terrified, slightly confused, and oh, I hope my face isn't showing it too much. The machine emitted a soft ping. Human honesty detected, nervousness quantified, probability of long-term engagement acceptable. Niral's ears flicked upward. Impressive. You did not attempt to cheat the sensors with false bravado. Mostly because I forgot how, Tomas admitted. Next came the intellectual challenge. Niral presented him with a holographic puzzle that simulated five-dimensional spatial logic intertwined with ethical decision-making scenarios involving hypothetical sentient species. Tomas squinted at the shifting lights and tried to find a pattern. You are overthinking, Niral said. Simplify. Tomas blinked. Simplify? Yes. Sometimes the correct solution is not the most complicated one. Or it involves convincing someone not to throw you into the quantum containment chamber. I'll keep that in mind, Tomas muttered, making a mental note that Niral clearly enjoyed including subtle threats in her lessons. Hours passed in similar fashion. Physical coordination exercises, mental agility games, etiquette trials, and an unexpected test of interspecies humor, in which Tomas had to improvise jokes that appealed simultaneously to humans, Ailiri, Karth, and Talver sensibilities. One joke about a Martian diplomat accidentally wearing a ceremonial vacuum helmet earned a muted chuckle from everyone but Niral, who laughed outright, her ears twitching in delight. You have potential, she said, though your sense of danger is curious. Tomas shrugged. Danger has been my companion for a while. I've learned to negotiate with it, politely when possible. Niral's eyes sparkled. That will serve you well. Many suitors were unprepared for honesty. They faltered under scrutiny, offended without knowing it, and often fled. Fled, Tomas repeated. Literally? Sometimes, Niral said. sometimes metaphorically. Either way they left, you remain. The neural resonance scanner chimed again. Unexpected neurological pattern detected, stability amid controlled chaos. Tomas raised an eyebrow. Is that good? Nyril tilted her head. Yes, or confusing, the machine cannot decide. But I like it. By the end of the day, Tomas realized that the palace trials were less about proving his worth than about surviving the process with humor intact. He had been called an awkward gravitational anomaly by an etiquette hologram, convinced a teleportation puzzle that he was mildly sentient, and accidentally discovered that one of the palace corridors rearranged itself when it was bored. At dinner, Nyril commented casually, "Your posture resembles someone expecting a small asteroid to land on them." Tomas looked down at himself. "I'm not expecting an asteroid. Then why do you stand like you are?" "I habit," Tomas said, realizing that honesty here might be as much a survival tactic as any military training. Nyril's lips curved in amusement. "You are honest even when unnecessary. That is rare. And potentially dangerous in a court full of pretense." Tomas laughed. "I'm not sure which one is worse, being honest or surviving your observation." "You may discover soon enough," Nyril replied, her ears flicking in rhythm with her amusement. That night, Tomas lay in his quarters trying to process everything. Between training, evaluation, and casual remarks from Nyril that cut sharper than any blade he had faced in combat, he realized he had survived more in one day than most humans could in a lifetime. And yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a strange exhilaration in being observed so honestly. In a universe built on careful lies, pretense, and diplomacy, Tomas had found someone whose words never hid behind etiquette. "Tomorrow," he muttered to the empty room, "I might die, but at least I'll know the truth first." Somewhere, a maintenance drone word passed and beeped in agreement, as if even machinery approved of his reasoning. Outside, the stars continued their silent orbit, oblivious to the peculiar human who had volunteered for the strangest assignment in interstellar history, and the alien princess, whose honesty could either destroy him or save him entirely. Either way, Tomas realized, humor might just be his best weapon. The final morning on Vareth Station began with the hum of anti-gravity corridors, the soft chime of service drones delivering breakfast, and the unmistakable sound of Tomas' vague groaning as he realized he had forgotten how to sleep upright in zero gravity. Princess Nyril floated into the dining hall, her long ears twitching slightly as she observed him. "You seem tired," she said. "I am," Tomas admitted. "Also mildly disoriented and probably several hours late for breakfast etiquette." "You may disregard etiquette here," Nyril replied, lifting a floating cup of nutrient gel. "Though punctuality is a useful skill." Tomas blinked. Useful, yes, common sense apparently optional. She laughed softly. "You are adjusting well." Tomas considered that. Adjusting well was a stretch. He had survived neural resonance scanners, endless truth assessments, interdimensional etiquette puzzles, and Nyril's relentless commentary on posture, expression, and tactical honesty. And yet he realized that he had begun to enjoy it. Not the danger, not the chaos, the truth, the simple, unfiltered honesty. At the summit, when he had stepped forward, he thought it was courage that propelled him. Now he knew better. It was exhaustion from a lifetime of pretense, and curiosity about what would happen if someone actually spoke the truth. Nyril floated closer. "You have grown accustomed to honesty," she observed. "I have," Tomas said carefully. "And it's terrifying but also freeing." She tilted her head. "Yes, many find it unbearable. That is why most suitors failed. You did not fail. You survived, and remarkably, you laughed along the way." Tomas grinned. "Laughter is a survival mechanism I've discovered." Nyril's ears twitched upward in approval. "Then you are ready for the final trial." Tomas's stomach dropped slightly. "Final trial. Observation," she said simply. 1 week of living among my family, staff, and the court without pretense, without concealment. Your actions, words, and thoughts will be noticed, and the truth will be reflected back to you." He nodded, taking a deep breath. Bring it on. The week unfolded like a delicate but relentless simulation. Every comment Tomas made was noted, every small joke catalogued, and every expression read. But something remarkable happened. The palace staff stopped pretending with him. The servants were candid but polite. The aides offered genuine advice instead of protocol. And even the palace AI began chiming in with helpful commentary instead of standard formalities. Nyril observed silently, occasionally correcting him when he mispronounced an alieri phrase or gestured incorrectly. "You flinch too much when startled," she remarked once. "Your reflexes are heroic but unnecessary in this room." "I'll try to calibrate," Tomas said, "though I'm fairly certain my instincts are permanently wired for battlefield chaos." By the end of the week, Tomas realized he was no longer just surviving. He was participating. He laughed with the staff, debated genuinely with advisors, and even challenged Nyril's own observations in playful repartee. When she commented that his military posture looked like a man negotiating with his shadow, he replied that her royal ears twitched like antennas trying to catch sarcasm. Nyril laughed, a sound so genuine it made a few hovering surveillance drones beep in approval. Queen Savar observed all of this quietly. The human soldier had endured, adapted, and grown, not because he was fearless, but because he was honest, resilient, and willing to learn. That rare combination, she realized, might be exactly what her daughter needed. On the day of the formal announcement, the hall filled once more with delegates from 5 worlds. Everyone expected spectacle, perhaps chaos, maybe even scandal. Instead, they found calm. Tomas and Nyril stood together, exchanging candid smiles. Queen Savar raised her hand. "Esteemed delegates, the question of a consort for my daughter has been answered. One human, brave enough, or perhaps tired enough of pretense, has volunteered. One human has endured observation, trials, and honesty without faltering. His name is Tomas Vey." A murmur ran through the assembly. The word human seemed to echo as if the species itself had suddenly gained new significance. Nyril stepped forward beside him. "And I," she said, "have observed. Honesty is not always kind, but it is illuminating. Tomas has endured it willingly. Therefore, I accept him." The hall erupted, not with the polite applause typical of diplomacy, but with genuine astonishment, laughter, and even some cautious admiration. Delegates scribbled notes for their reports, unsure whether to describe this as courage, insanity, or revolutionary diplomacy. Tomas felt his chest expand with something unfamiliar: relief, pride, and a strange sense of belonging. The human who had been tired of lies, exhausted by pretense, and frightened of everything was no longer just a soldier. He had become a participant in something extraordinary. Nyril nudged him gently. "You have grown," she said, "and I enjoy your perspective, even when it is amusingly flawed." "I've grown," Tomas agreed, "and honestly, I think I've learned that truth, while uncomfortable, is worth stepping forward for." Nyril's ears twitched. "Then perhaps our species have more in common than most assume." They laughed together, a sound that echoed through the domed halls, carrying over to the diplomats and drones, and even drifting out into the void beyond the station. Queen Savar watched her daughter and the human soldier, realizing that sometimes the greatest bravery is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to endure truth and to embrace it. Tomas looked out over the stars, imagining the galaxy's endless possibilities. Somewhere among those distant suns were other challenges, other worlds, other moments of pretense waiting to be disrupted. And he thought with quiet certainty that as long as he kept speaking honestly, he could meet any of them. Princess Nyril's hand brushed his, simple, human, and honest. "Are you ready?" she asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Tomas said, smiling. And together they stepped forward, not just as princess and volunteer, but as equals in a galaxy that had finally begun to understand that honesty could be its own kind of adventure. The summit concluded. Diplomats departed with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Ambassadors who had expected drama found instead a new precedent, courage measured in truth, not in conquest. And somewhere deep in the station's observation deck, a small drone beeped happily, as if acknowledging that history had just taken a peculiar, beautiful turn. Tomas exhaled, feeling the weight of weeks lift, replaced by something heavier but better. Understanding. He had volunteered for fear and curiosity alike, endured scrutiny and humor, and emerged transformed. Nyril leaned closer. "You survived honesty," she said. "I did," Tomas said, smiling at her. "And in return, you've changed me," she said. "And you've changed me," Tomas replied. And in that truth, in that simple, unfiltered acknowledgement, a huge